Hello and welcome everyone to the Recruit and Interview Candidates Like It's 2018 webinar. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Eric Allen, Marketing Coordinator for One Touch Video Chat, and your MC this afternoon. And we'll begin the presentation here shortly, but before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items for you. First off, we'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. There's a panel on the right of your screen where you can submit questions for Carrie. Feel free to ask anything and everything that you'd like, and we'll field those at the end. Then also at the end of the webinar, we'll be pushing out a new infographic on the narrowing the hiring funnel with live video interviews. And you can find more information at www.livevideointerviews.com. But without further delay, I'd like to introduce our host, Carrie Chitsey-Wells, co-founder and COO of One Touch Video Chat. Since founding one of the first mobile companies in the US in 2008, she is known in the industry as a leader in digital mobile innovation. Named top 50 mobile executives in the US, top 100 female founders, and top 40 marketing executives in the US. She also hosts a podcast, Executive Innovation, and is published in many magazines and online resources. Carrie, sending it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Happy to have everybody today on the Recruit and Interview Candidates Like It's 2018. I feel like we've just started 2018 and we're almost through Q1. So hopefully you'll be able to take away some great information from here today and apply it quickly to 2018. So we have a pretty full agenda here. I'm going to be buzzing through a lot of this, given the full agenda. We're going to talk about some of the recruiting trends and predictions, really get into the candidate experience and the expectations. Talk about really how to stand out in this competitive kind of recruiting clutter. And, looking for the grit and how to identify that in candidates. Going to compare the traditional hiring funnel and that process and some of the industry numbers and compare that to the live video interview. Then look at some kind of sample ROI as well as some opportunity areas. So first, just there's been a lot of really great data come out about recruiting trends for 2018, recruiting trends of what happened kind of last year. And so wanted to cover some of those highlights. Really, it's a candidate-driven market. 86% of recruiters say that, and 62% of the employers and hiring managers say that. That's given a lot to being so many job openings with such a low employment rate, in addition to just the expectations from a consumer experience standpoint have now bubbled over into the candidate side. The interview process timeline and time frame is really just been climbing over the years. Given the interview process has increased since 2019, up to, on average right now, 22.9 days. And it's usually taking 3 interviews, a 3-step process, and 3 to 6 weeks to get an offer out for a position. And so a lot of the big companies are really struggling with how to narrow this timeline, given kind of historical hiring patterns and how to adopt that in this digital world that we live in. And then the talent pool and the unemployment rate. There was a great, and I'm actually going to show a couple screenshots of it, a great Fortune magazine cover last month that talks about, the unemployment rate is the lowest we've seen since 2001 at 4%. And some of the job categories like IT and healthcare and things like that, it's down to, in 1 to 2%. And so it's very competitive, and the candidates are interviewing the companies and the hiring managers just as much as they're being interviewed. There's currently over 6 million open jobs in the US. And, with the slowest fill rate and the low numbers on the unemployment side, it's a very tough market. Lack of talent. 65% of recruiters claim that, the lack of talent and talent shortage is one of the biggest hiring obstacles. But, typically you're getting a lot of resumes from folks that, are unemployed or, recently just made a move. But 74% of the workforce that is, currently working is open to a job change if contacted. And so with some of the tools we're going to talk about today, historically, that's very, hard to reach and get those folks to come in. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. You've probably heard the buzzwords of culture fit and grit and some of the things that have recently kind of come out of what really makes employers hire folks. And it's not necessarily anymore just about the resume. It's, does that person have the culture fit and the grit and the intangibles that aren't on a resume? In addition to that, the younger generation, 83% of today's managers are millennials. 50% of the labor market in the next 18 months is going to come from millennials, and 75% by 2022. And now you've got Gen Z getting into the workforce. And so they're going to make up over 20% of that in the next 18 months. And for those categories, culture fit is really big for them in evaluating how they want to work for a company as well. So it really boils down to, it used to be all, recruiters and hiring managers drive the experience and not much care or concern about the candidates. And now it's really, companies are putting folks in charge of the candidate experience and putting folks in charge of marketing and branding the candidate experience. And so there's a lot of emphasis and a lot that we're seeing on that side. One of the things I think is, very telling is 80% of people would take one job over another based on personalized relationships that are formed during the interview process. So that really means that, first impressions count. Developing a relationship in that hiring process really counts. And really comparing yourself to, who the other folks are that they're actually interviewing with. Almost 60% of job seekers, have experienced a poor candidate experience, as well as 63%, are rejected an offer because of that. So if your representation of the company is the recruiter or the HR person, the hiring manager, and that candidate doesn't feel like they've, been recognized and or don't feel any connection there, they're going to refuse the job offer in that process. As we have more of the, glass doors and, all the review sites, having that positive experience and having people share that, will help just as much as the bad reviews will hurt you. So here's the article I was referencing. And if you haven't read this is just such a great read. I highly encourage you to pick this up. It's still, a lot of places it's still in the Standard. You can get it electronically. But it's the February, just last month, cover of Fortune magazine. And a couple of key points I'm going to highlight throughout this from the article if you didn't have time to read it. Number one, the number one reason people don't accept jobs is that they accepted another offer. And that really means is that this speed to hire is going to become, a major issue. And companies really trying to adapt, kind of digital HR tools to reduce their speed to hire. The other thing is that, the competition is fierce. First impressions count. So we're going to talk a lot today about live video interviews and how to stand out in this cluttered and crowded space. And I say it all the time is, if you video interview and you build a personalized relationship with somebody, they're going to remember the conversation, what you look like, the name, all kinds of details. If you ask that same candidate, how many more phone interviews they've done this week, most of them won't even be able to tell you the name of the person that interviewed them or, not a lot of details about the company. The other thing here is the number of job openings. I mean, if you look over here, like we haven't seen this number of job openings since like 2001. And, with the cost, salaries going up, the unemployment rate being so low, it's just, two sides to the coin of how to really help this process. So one of the things that's kind of funny and gleaming at the same time is, millennials aren't just, salary is not the biggest thing for them. So it's really, again, about that culture fit, about that grit, about, really looking for career advancement. And so 64% of millennials would rather make $40,000 a year versus $100,000 a year for a job that they really love, that's not boring, and that doesn't have any career advancement. So if you look from the candidate experience standpoint, the candidate side, what is really making them make decisions on going to companies? Number one, that entire demographic, even your Gen Zs, are all about career advancement, learning, and mentorship. And then secondarily is, this is a generation that grew up on digital technology, grew up on mobile devices. They want to work with cool technology. So one of the biggest turnoffs of this demographic is working with something boring, old school, where they don't feel like that company's going to make changes. And so that cool technology starts for day one. So, millennials and Gen Zs, they already communicate more on FaceTime and using video apps like Skype, FaceTime, Duo, things like that, versus making an audio call to friends and family. So why not have that first impression be a cool technology with your company, and get them in that way. The other things are, flexible work options, and then that they really get behind the culture and the mission of the company. And so 80% of millennials, look for cultural fit. They look for a cultural fit to accept an offer. So it's not just about, sometimes you feel like it's just about the money, and it's not. So the one thing that, was in this article that I've practiced for years is really about the grit. And so there's a lot of companies now that are, doing new and creative ways to find people with the grit, and not just looking beyond the resume. And so the average recruiter spends about 6 seconds doing a resume scan, and typically you're looking for just as, do they meet the qualifications? Do they have the work history? And the article was always all really about is not necessarily do you have to look at what they've done in the past, but what are some of the things on the resume that could grow them into a future role? What is that grit? What is the, their insight, their work ethic, the ability to adapt on the fly, really that strength of character. And so those are things that obviously, you can't teach. Those are the intangibles that aren't on the resume. And, being able to do video interviews and being able to see that, you don't get a lot of that over the phone. But to have that human connection, which is what this article is really written about. It's a proven fact, and there's some great research. I won't bore you with it if you read the article, that, GPA, SAT scores, whatever it may be, where they went to college is not what is making people good managers and the ability to lead a team. And we're going to see more and more of this as, Gen Zs will be the first demographic with over 60% of them not going to college. So it'll become more important. So when we talk about the traditional hiring funnel, if you're looking at these numbers, your numbers are going to vary based on the type of role you're hiring for and things like that. But let's just take the industry as an average for last year. So most people that are hiring for positions in today's world are getting 250 resumes for one job opening. Now, depending upon what you're hiring for, you may get less, you may get more. But out of that, if you look over here to the right, the average ratio is 14-1, meaning you're going to do a phone screen with 14 people. And of that 14, you're going to bring in person about 4 to 6 people. So we'll take 5 on average. And then you're going to make an offer to one of the folks. So if we look at a typical interview process and kind of funnel, and I talk to companies all the day, and some bring people in for full days and of interviews with many candidates, and their hiring costs are significantly higher. But let's just look at it from an average perspective. Is 8.2 days from the time you reach out to the candidate for that first phone interview. So we wasted a week there just trying to get the interview on the books and scheduled for a phone interview. And then from that phone interview, if they make it to the next phase, it's typically 6.8 days. So we got another week there. And then based on that interview, that could be another phone interview, that could be bringing them in person, just depends on how you do your process, another 5.3 days. And then in this funnel here, you typically having multiple people involved. So how many interviews does it typically happen before a hire? So 53% of hiring managers say it's typically 3 steps before a hire, and then 22% it's 4 steps. And so those are kind of some of the averages. So taking that and then looking at how to incorporate live video interviews into your funnel, there's a few buckets here, and we're going to step through each bucket. Number one, in that capture phase, whether you're posting jobs on, the typical boards, you've got them on your website, if you require an application or resume submission, doesn't really matter from that standpoint. What does matter is the ability to target candidates that aren't in your current hiring funnel. So most people, the reason, if you go back to the stat I said earlier, 74% of people are open to interviewing for a job that are currently working. The reason they're not on the job boards, they're out looking for jobs, is number one, it's a full-time job, right? And, they don't have time to take off work. Most people only have a certain number of PTO and vacation time, and trying to use that to take off for a bunch of different interviews when you really haven't even sold them on the job yet is very slim to happening. So the ability to market your competitors, to market the types of employees you're looking for, and typically in your market, what good employees come from, to market colleges, things like that, where you can do video interviews and somebody could do it on their lunch break, prior to going into the office, whatever it may be, on their break, and be able to do that for 15 to 20 minutes. And you can, see if there's a connection, see if there's a culture fit, and then invite them to the next round and convince them of the job and show them the career advancement and the opportunity really helps. The second one, the screening. So most people, as a first line of defense, do a phone screen, and typically, set up an hour for a phone screen. It's a proven fact that doing a video screen versus a phone screen is dramatically different. So if you believe Deloitte, it's 6 times faster than doing a phone. So you can save some serious hiring resource or recruiter resource time there, up to 70%. We're going to talk about, some of our use cases and actual numbers, but I can tell you from doing it myself that I've never spent more than, 25 minutes on a video interview versus what I typically would have done for an hour phone interview. And the next one, the actual interviews. So depending upon how your hiring process works, after the phone screen, you may have, if you're having recruiters and HR do a phone screen, then typically in this step, now you're going to have a hiring manager or somebody else do a phone screen before you. And the reason everybody wants to do that is they don't want to waste their time having a bunch of in-person interviews with somebody that kind of hasn't got through that first round. So allowing hiring managers and executives to also use live video interviews, you're going to be able to weed out, 50 to 60% right there doing it. It also reduces the hiring timeline, typically by 7 to 14 days. Now, again, if you're one of these companies that has, a much larger timeline between interviews, then these numbers can be even greater for you. So the national average hiring cost is $4,129. You might know what your actual hiring cost is, or know if that's low or high for you. But with live video interviews using kind of the same principles, you're able to cut that down to about $23.12, which is an $1,800 savings. And so we're having a full infographic of this coming out sometime next week. So check back on our site. But this is kind of a preview for those that have attended. But if you look at the traditional interview, so you've got the phone interview here, and you've got the live video interview, and taking the national average of 14 phone screens, Doing it by phone, you're going to spend about 840 minutes on that, doing the phone screens. In comparison, just for this first funnel, you're going to spend about 336 minutes. So that's taking a 60-minute phone interview to about a 24-minute on average video interview. Being conservative, and I'll tell you that this is not reality that you would come out with the same 5 people, but taking the national average of that 14, then breaking it down to 5 for the next round, just being ultra conservative here, and being able then to reduce it down to the people that you bring in. This next level is going to be reduced from 33 hours to 14.6. And so basically, if you take one job opening, okay, you're able to take your interview time from your resource time from 33 hours to 14.6, which equates to roughly a 56% reduction in hiring. Now, your ROI numbers might be a little bit different. You may be screening more candidates, so your ROI is going to be greater. You may be, doing less or more, but that's a good average right there from that standpoint. So we get a lot of questions of, hey, I use pre-recorded one-way videos, or I've looked at it in the past. How's that different than live video interviews? So the pre-recorded videos, if you read anything about what the candidates think of it, it has very low ratings. So only 8.5% of people prefer one-way recorded videos, where 57% prefer live video. Why is that? Some of the comments are, hey, it's like talking to a wall. The recruiters are saying, hey, I can't really see any reactions. And, there's no way to really kind of augment that process to ask follow-up questions. And, it's, better than not doing anything in some regards. But, for a lot of the HR folks that we've talked to, it's added time to the hiring process of sifting through a lot of these videos. So when we talk about live video interviews, there's a couple of key things, and we'll talk about some use cases here in a second. There's a couple of key things that just you cannot replace from a pre-recorded standpoint. Number one, being able to role play, being able to, we talk about banking a lot. We talk about, hospitality and concierge, things like that. There's no better way to find out, how somebody is going to react than to give them kind of a real scenario and see how, if you can put them in front of a customer. The second thing is really, on the one-way recorded, you're not increasing the candidate experience. You're actually reducing it. And so if you have any mission on building relationships and increasing your candidate experience from a hiring process, live video interviews is definitely the way to go over recorded if that's a priority for your organization. Competitive advantage. Most of the pre-recorded videos you've seen is the company that offers them, the candidate then goes and downloads that company's mobile app. There's, a lot of issues on how long it takes to record your answers and upload those videos. So a lot of people kind of drop off in that process. And then from a live video interview standpoint, to be able to brand it as your own technology, to put it on your own website under your careers page, or have your own landing page, makes you look like an innovative company. It really makes you look like to reach the demographic that is embraced by technology. And there's no better way to see somebody over video versus bringing them in. I know one of the biggest pains that a lot of hiring managers have is, I had a great resume, had a great phone interview, and you knew in 5 minutes when they came in person that they just were not a cultural fit. And you can't tell that from a phone interview, and it's hard to tell sometimes on pre-recorded because you can't have that interaction. You can't read somebody's enthusiasm and mannerisms and things of that nature. So now getting into the fun stuff of, we get a lot of questions of how does live video interviews work? How do I incorporate it into my existing process? And this portion is going to cover that. So number one, you can put I can't speak on other platforms that have assessments and so forth. Although I do know that it takes a lot longer to do. But I'll speak of our technology. We've created this widget here that you can put on any page on your website that allows your candidates to connect through there. You can have a drop down of different job types for them to connect, or you can have a direct interview code. So if I'm a recruiter or a hiring manager, the same way I do today of sending out a meeting invite for an interview at tomorrow at 11 a.m., I would just give them a URL and my direct hiring or recruiting code, and they can connect with me personally one-on-one. There's two ways to do it. This website widget is totally branded for your company, your colors, your logo, your everything that you want it to say. And to put it on your website takes about 3 to 5 minutes. Even non-developers can put it on a site. It's super easy. Also, we have livevideointerviews.com/your company name. We have a pretty cool kind of live video interview landing page. Some companies do that so they can keep it separate, and if they don't want it on their website. There's also a survey, which I'll show you in a second. Both the candidate gets a survey at the end of the interview, and the interviewer gets a survey too. So you have instant candidate experience that you can get from the candidate about the interview and about the role. And then the hiring manager can provide feedback as well. The great thing about that is you may think, hey, I had this really awesome interview. And then all of a sudden the candidate, says that, based on what they heard, they may not be as interested in the position as you thought they were. So getting that candidate feedback instantly is really good. And then from the recruiter standpoint, here's kind of the view of the dashboard from that perspective. So a couple of stats here really about the live video interviews: 6 times faster than phone, 7 to 14 days reduction in speed to hire and fill rate, up to 70% reduction in your hiring resource time, cost by hire by up to 2/3, so anywhere from 50 to 75%. And then really, if you're not targeting to reach that millennial and Gen Z demographic, you will be, given how much of the workforce they're making up. So without showing you the technology live today, I'm going to show you a little bit screens, and then if you'd like to see it live and see your own ROI, I'm happy to share that to you as well. So here's our hiring page right here. You can see in the background, and here's the widget. The open job positions would be in the drop down here. You can also do virtual job fairs, which is really cool. So instead of you're opening up a new location and you've got hiring managers in different places, instead of spending money on travel costs or temporary places to do interviews, you can do them remotely. And also you can get people that already have jobs that can't take off work from a 2 to 4 for a job fair. So you have the ability to route by hiring manager as well as connect directly. Then the video comes up here. Nothing's needed from the candidate side. As long as they have Chrome or Firefox as the browser and they're connecting on a computer with the webcam, there's nothing to download. There's no hardware or anything needed. The cool thing is for the companies that use kind of our landing page, there's like a 1, 2, 3 that tells them what to have before they connect. Then once the interview's done, this survey pops up here, like I said, and so getting that feedback, we see over 80% completion rate on the survey there, and so being able to see that and measure that. It's also pretty cool from an HR perspective of you may have a bunch of recruiters or internal, external working for you. You may have hiring managers, and to get that instant feedback, you may find out that maybe somebody has a better interview style than others, and be able to address that. On the recruiter and the hiring manager side, we have this really slick platform that's super easy. Not much training needs to happen on it. have an online training course that gets recruiters and hiring managers up to speed. Basically takes about 15 minutes to understand, how to accept the video and what to do. But you have the ability, you have your own queue if you're doing direct interviews, and then you have a joint queue. So if Eric and I interviewed folks for a mortgage position for banking, and Sean and Casey interviewed new business bankers, we would be in different groups. And so if we wanted to, have us interview or do any virtual job fairs or anything like that, we could have the folks there. And again, on the recruiter or the hiring manager side, the requirements are the same. There's no software, there's no hardware. As long as you have the browser and the webcam, you could be at home, you could be, at any particular location, office, whatever it may be. And then you've got this screen here that pops up from that perspective. Both sides of the coin are able to mute the video or mute the audio if they need to do that for any reason. And then you've got the reporting and analytics behind it. So the really cool thing is to say, hey, we talked to Carrie Chitsey, the candidate today, and she had a 21-minute video interview, and Sean was the person that interviewed her, and you've got both sides of the coin. So a lot of companies that we talk to that, don't have the big bucks for applicant tracking systems and CRMs and things like that, this kind of gives you, we don't by any means claim to be an applicant tracking system company, and we're completely agnostic for that reason. If you can use our technology with an applicant tracking system, or if you don't have one, it gives you, full tracking of the video conversations from that perspective. You can export that data into an applicant tracking system or export it yourself. So here's the recruiter dashboard, and the hiring manager dashboard has more of a close-up. So every user of the system, you have the number up here. This is the direct code. So this is the same number. My number stays the same. Everybody's number stays the same. So if you're back-to-back in interviews, the number stays the same, so you can send out meeting invites and so forth. We have the concept of regular and then administrative supervisor access. So if I'm a hiring manager and I'm just a regular user, I'm not going to be able to see the candidate's feedback about me. Maybe my boss sees that, or the HR director, or whoever. So for some reason, if I get a lot of bad feedback, maybe that doesn't. Maybe somebody can coach me on that. You have the My Queue, which is any of your personalized interviews would come into that. And then if I was a member of a group, I would see anything come here. You got desktop notifications. So if you're doing something else and don't have the dashboard up, it will notify you. So you can set that up. And then you can see here the candidate that came in, then who did the interview, what the rating was, all of that kind of cool stuff from that perspective. So where are the biggest areas of opportunity on the HR side? So number one, obviously recruiting, which we've talked a lot about today, and the virtual job fairs. Also, you can put live video interviews anywhere within your hiring funnel. So if you just want to start doing it in replace or to augment some of the phone interviews, you can do that. Where you start to see some significant, and that'll give you, ROI within, depending on how many people you're hiring right away. But then incorporating that into, farther down the funnel, right? So connecting your hiring managers to the candidate before you bring them in. You can schedule these a lot faster. If you're scheduling, a 20-minute video interview, or 30-minute versus blocking a full hour, or making people go to locations, you can get a lot more done. It's a proven fact that a 5-minute video interview is the equivalent to a 200-question online assessment. So just ponder on that for a second. Seasonal new hiring, new locations. So if you're a restaurant, if you're a retailer or a bank, whatever, hotel, and you've got a new location, you're trying to hire fast, you're trying to hire a lot of people. You have to get hiring managers, HR people to go on location. You may have to have a temporary facility if you're doing construction, to be able to do all of that virtually, to do your advertisements and your recruiting efforts. You can connect hiring managers. Let's say you're opening up a new location in Texas. You could have hiring managers in Louisiana, Illinois, New York. The candidate doesn't need to know. You can treat everybody equally. When we see a lot of, especially like in manufacturing, restaurants, things like that, where you have a centralized HR and you have locations all across different places. It's also used on the flip side to be able to do video HR services for employees. So let's say I have an employee in Pennsylvania and I've got a harassment issue, or I've got a vacation issue that somebody needs to talk about, or they've got a complaint about a manager, and I may have a local HR person on staff, or maybe I don't, but they're lower level. Maybe I need them to connect back to headquarters and go into an office or a conference room or a meeting room and have a video conversation. It really can help from a retention standpoint, and not getting things jaded over email or phone calls, and be able to have that connection and really make a call as an HR director, the situation from that standpoint. So I will open it up for questions. And Eric, I think you've been gathering them, and you'll kick us off there.
Yes, indeed we have. So we are going to transition to the Q&A portion now. We're still accepting questions, so thank you everyone who has submitted. If you have any questions now, you can submit those to the Q&A session on the right portion of your screen, and then we'll review those. But we've got a few questions here. First off, can this have a direct impact on costs and savings for 2018? How fast do you typically see results with some of the implementations you've seen?
So if I go back to the infographic we're putting on next week on the ROI, we'll shed a lot of light on that. And for anybody that's on that wants to have a conversation, we can do the numbers and give you a pretty close ROI of what you would see and how fast. But taking and I'll scroll back slides for a second. Taking the ROI sample we showed earlier and the cost savings of 1817, that's per candidate. So if you look at the cost, to roll out the live video interviews, if you used it for 2 candidates, you would break even for the year. Okay, so that's 2 candidates for a year, not per year, not per month. So for companies that are hiring more than 2 people a year, the ROI is insane. So typically you can see the ROI. If you hire 1 candidate with the platform, you should have over 100% ROI in your first month. If you use the technology to what it's supposed to be used. And again, it depends on which pieces of the funnel. But yeah, the ROI is immediate, is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question here, and they're asking, I can see a clear benefit with volume recruiting, but what about benefits in situations where you aren't hiring at volume?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to is, if you're hiring more than 2 people a year, you're making out on your ROI. So sometimes it's not as necessarily how many people you're hiring, but it's what caliber of people you're hiring. As an example, coming from Big 5 Consulting and looking at that as, you have consultants all over the country, and they may not be hiring in large volumes. It may only be, 1 or 2 people a quarter for that particular practice. But everybody interviewing them lives in different parts of the country, and you're flying around people and things like that, as well as, like the college recruiting that only happens, once or twice a year. And, especially if you look at that article in Fortune, it has some really great stats on unemployment rate by industry. So if you take like healthcare, who has like the lowest unemployment rate, regardless of you're a doctor's office or a hospital, you're competing with very fierce competition, and the ability to get that interview the fastest and make the offer the fastest is going to win. Same with like tech resources. So, it depends on what vertical you're in. But, saving anybody time and money regardless of number of hires.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question kind of revolving around how to implement, and they're asking where in the hiring process they present the option for a video interview. Is this on the job board, on their website, or after they've already done the phone interview? Where would you recommend using this?
Yeah, so if we go back to the hiring funnel, you can it really depends on your own individual hiring process. We can make recommendations on where to put it that'll give you the biggest ROI. But if we go back to this slide I'm showing here, marketing it during this capture process, and not marketing it like, everybody just come and do a video interview, but if you're going after, especially in, very competitive spaces like call centers and, manufacturing and things like that, where that, you're down the road is your biggest competitor, being able to talk to those individuals and saying that you have this technology and they don't need to take off work and working around them is a big competitive advantage. Phone screens for sure are just a natural replacement and augment there. And then also with hiring managers. So there might be some culture shift on the hiring manager, and maybe you don't do that day one. But, when you're looking at millennial, people in management and so forth, they would much rather do a video interview than have somebody in person and waste their time.
Mm-hmm. So one of our attendees, they are implementing pre-recorded videos right now, as far as that goes. Is this a replacement or an augmentation to that?
So if you're already implementing, it would be an augmentation. If you're considering both, a lot of people end up, skipping the pre-recorded and going straight with live video interviews. But pre-recorded videos definitely would be, live video interviews would be the second step of a pre-recorded. So if you're implementing pre-recorded videos, you still have to have a conversation with the person. So if you have pre-recorded videos, you're still going to do a phone interview with that person to, talk to them further and see how they are on the fly. And so then putting live video interviews after that, when you've narrowed that funnel, would be the logical next step.
And then we have another question, and this one kind of revolves around the length of the interview. And you touched on this, that you're able to reduce some of the times, but does the technology support, an hour-long interview, for instance, if you have, multiple people talking with an individual person or wherever the circumstance might be?
Yeah, I mean, it can be whatever duration that you want it to be. It supports definitely length. I mean, the highest quality HD and the audio is pristine. It's going to be significantly higher quality than, a Skype or FaceTime or anything of that nature. There's no limitations on the time frame. So, whether it's 5 minutes or I don't think you want to do a 5-hour interview, but nobody would want to do that, period. But an hour and a half, whatever. Yeah, there's no issues there.
Let's see. And then, okay, we also have another question revolving around how to implement it. And specifically, does it have any hardware on the back end, servers, cameras? What would it take for someone to actually implement this?
So the great thing about the technology is, there's no servers on your side. You don't have to get IT involved. There's no software to install, nothing in that. So literally you can be up and running in, 48 hours. And a lot of that is really dependent. The reason it's not 5 minutes is because you actually have to, determine what survey questions you want and things like that, which usually takes somebody more than a few minutes to think about. But that's the great news. So there's no hardware. If you look at some other platforms, there's hardware and hosting and things like that. And when you start talking about hardware and IT gets involved, then it starts to get longer out on the roadmap. And The good news is, you can put it on your website. We do have mobile apps and things like that too. But if you're looking to, more low cost, low time to implement, put it on your current website, or, clients that want to move faster than their web guys, even though it only takes a few minutes. You can use the livevideointerviews.com/your company name and be, putting it into your process in a couple of days. Pretty quick.
Yeah, very plug and play friendly. So another one of our attendees, they're using Skype right now for their interviews. Why use our video solution compared to using something Skype where they can just use that?
Well, so Skype is, a consumer-to-consumer communication tool, right? And some companies may have implemented Skype for business, things like that. In the U.S., not many people actually have Skype accounts unless their business dictates them to have one. So it's like over 70% of the population in the U.S. doesn't have a Skype account. So it's super clunky. So if I wanted to do an interview with you on Skype, I'm going to need to know your Skype ID. You're going to need to know mine. I'm going to have to send you a contact request. You're going to have to accept it. We're going to have this whole back and forth thing. Not to mention, as a recruiter or hiring manager, now you have my personal information. So what's the first thing that's going to happen when you want to check on the job? You're not going back to the recruiter that you came in with. You're going to start pinging me on Skype, trying to call me on Skype. You're going to be a big pain in my side. There's no kind of autonomy there from that perspective. Also, if you've used Skype, you've probably seen the video quality. It starts to really freeze frame, fall out, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't work on mobile, things like that. And then from a company standpoint, like if I'm an executive, I don't want all these things. Like I have no track to know like what's going on in Skype, how long anything was, what the feedback. What this platform really does is brings it all into one place. You can see when the interviews were done, how long, who did them, what's the feedback. So you don't have all of that with the Skype from that standpoint.
Yeah, so much more optimized for business rather than just a consumer solution.
Yeah, I mean, Skype doesn't have the dashboard, right? So yeah, if you just want to do straight up video and kind of cross your fingers at all as well.
Very good. Well, do we have any additional questions from our viewers today? And give everyone a little bit of a chance to submit some.
Yeah, and if you have any additional questions, this screen has my contact information. Feel free to reach out, shoot any questions maybe you're shy to ask today, or if you're interested in your own ROI, you can shoot me, kind of what some of your numbers are, or we can have a chat, and it's pretty quick to figure out what your actual ROI is based on your hiring process.
Awesome. Well, very good. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today. Before we leave, I'm sharing with you right now our latest infographic for industry data. A lot of it that we share with you today, and that's condensed version for you. You should be able to see that now. As a reminder, we're going to have this recording and other resources are available on our website, www.livevideointerviews.com. So we'll have that recording up for you shortly. Also, if you'd like to see your actual hiring ROI with live video interviews or see the technology, reach out to Carrie directly or contact us, and we'll be more than happy to chat with you about that. And Carrie, I want to thank you so much for presenting. I hope this is very helpful for all of you.
Yeah, thanks for everybody for joining. Hopefully I didn't make your brain hurt too bad and give you back a few minutes of probably a back-to-back day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.